Chapter 261. With a sound, the firmament lost its color. A person stomped the ground, and the high mountains shook. As this person arrived, their blood energy was like a true dragon. Their saint might like the power of heaven, with thunder rumbling. Everyone felt a powerful suppression, their hearts pounding and their ears ringing. An old man strode in. A divine halo faintly encircled his body, and this divine halo seemed to be substantial. Grand Saint Grand Completion. Seeing the divine halo faintly circling this old man's body, an older generation vassal king couldn't help but gasp. Grand Saint. This was the absolute peak of the ancient saint realm. Ancient saints were categorized by rank, from lowest to highest, minor saint, lesser saint, and grand saint. The divine halo faintly visible on the old man before them meant he was a grand saint grand completion. One more step, and he would be the legendary Saint Venerable. In the 3/10 of thousands of years of the age of the void Tao, an existence capable of stepping into the ancient saint realm was already astonishingly talented. Apart from the ancient saints of the generation before those 3/10 of thousands of years and those old undying individuals who suppressed their bloodline and halted their lifespan, any cultivator who entered the ancient saint realm in these 3/10 of thousands of years was absolutely a terrifying figure. A grand saint grand completion was even more formidable. If not for the harsh age of the void Tao, he would have long been an extraordinary Saint Venerable. Van Saint Sword. In the crowd, an older generation figure recognized the old man, crying out in alarm. Van Saint Sword. Legend says he is the last disciple of the Sacred Heaven sect's patriarch. Hearing this name, other vassal kings were also shocked. It is him. A vassal king muttered. Seeing the old man before them, even an ancient saint would narrow their eyes. Van Saint Sword was the Sacred Heaven sect patriarch's final disciple, his closed-door student. In fact, he was taken as a disciple after the Sacred Heaven sect defeated the Cleansing Incense ancient sect that year. At the time, the Sacred Heaven sect patriarch had already been in seclusion. It was only because of his extraordinary talent that the Sacred Heaven patriarch made an exception and took him in as his final disciple. In reality, the time Van Saint Sword received direct instruction from the Sacred Heaven sect patriarch was very short. More often, his senior brothers taught him on the master's behalf. However, Van Saint Sword truly possessed immense talent. Even during the age of the void Tao, he broke through to the ancient saint realm and achieved grand completion. If not for the harsh age of the void Tao, he would have long been an unimaginable Saint Venerable. Van Saint Sword arrived, looking coldly at the group. His divine might was immense. He sneered and said, Qiye, since when did your 9-saint demon gate become so arrogant? As a disciple of the Sacred Heaven sect patriarch and a grand saint grand completion, Van Saint Sword truly had the capital to look down on all beings. Facing Van Saint Sword, even an elder like Qiye changed color. In terms of cultivation, he was truly no match for Van Saint Sword. When the 9-saint demon gate was arrogant, your Sacred Heaven sect was still playing in the mud somewhere. Qiye had not yet spoken. But Qiye said lazily. Van Saint Sword's eyes instantly narrowed. He looked coldly at Qiye, his voice like a great bell. He said sternly, Ignorant junior, even a god coming today won't save you. With that, a large hand grasped toward Qiye. Van Saint Sword's strike was terrifyingly powerful. Heaven and earth thundered, and laws cascaded down like a heavenly waterfall. A single falling law could crush the ancient cliff, sending shivers down everyone's spines. The large hand reaching out caused even Qiye and Li Shuangyan's expressions to change. But Qiye was completely calm. He already held his ancient zither in his arms. With a pluck of his finger, clang, a wisp of imperial foundation instantly pierced the sky like a sharp point. Puffed. Blood sprayed like heavy rain. The wisp of imperial foundation severed the law, pierced the large hand, and blood rained down. Imperial item. In an instant, Van Saint Sword's face changed drastically. He retreated several steps. Even an ancient saint would change color upon seeing the might of an imperial item. Even he, a Grand Saint Grand Completion, dared not claim he could survive the Imperial Foundation's fatal strike. Imperial item. Not only Van Saint's sword, but the observing cultivators present also changed color, involuntarily retreating several steps. Everyone knew the significance of an Imperial item. Although an Imperial item could not be compared to an Immortal Emperor weapon, and certainly not to an Immortal Emperor prohibited artifact, its contained Imperial Foundation and Immortal Might were not something ordinary beings could resist. Absolutely not an ancient saint. The moment the Imperial Foundation and Immortal Might were unleashed, they were invincible. As long as the Imperial Foundation struck, what difference did it make if he was a Grand Saint Grand Completion? Wouldn't his head still fall to the ground? What's so impressive about the Sacred Heaven sect? Bring your Imperial armament out then. Qiye smiled. Clang, 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 he plucked the zither strings. In an instant, streams of Imperial Foundation surged out from within the ancient zither, like wisps of blue smoke. One stream of Imperial Foundation was enough to crush heaven and earth. In an instant, everyone trembled, gripped by terror from the depths of their hearts. Imperial Foundation and Immortal Might were not something mere mortals could resist. Humph, do you think only you possess an Imperial item? With a cold snort, Ji Kongjian rushed out from nowhere and sneered. He held his inkstone in his hand. Immediately, his inkstone was filled with surging black qi, also releasing streams of Imperial Foundation. Brother Kongjian, help us. Kill this person, and the Imperial item is yours. Seeing Ji Kongjian strike, Sacred Heaven Dao Child was overjoyed. With two bursts of Imperial Foundation unleashed, not only the ancient cliff, but the entire ancient city changed color. The sun, moon, and stars instantly grew dim. A disciple of Sky Trampling Mountain. Seeing Ji Kongjian, someone cried out in alarm, could this be a clash of two Imperial Foundations? Sky Trampling Mountain, good. Let's settle all old and new debts at once. Qiye sneered. Clang, clang, clang. The zither music grew more urgent, and the Imperial Foundation that emerged became denser. Imperial Foundation could easily slay an ancient saint, but shattering another Imperial item was not easy. As Qiye plucked the zither, the ancient zither's luster grew dimmer and dimmer, and the Imperial Foundation consumed became greater and greater. Competing in Imperial items with me. Seeing Qiye recklessly consume the Imperial Foundation, Ji Kongjian shouted loudly. The inkstone in his hand also billowed with mist, and the ink within the inkstone became increasingly sparse. Both sides were fiercely mobilizing powerful Imperial Foundation, aiming for the strongest strike. In the end, it depended on whose Imperial item was the most potent. Where did this brat come from, jabbering on like this? All of you, go die. Suddenly, an old man wearing a paper hat appeared from nowhere. He stretched out one hand and instantly slammed the Imperial Foundation back, turning it into ink that fell into the inkstone. Bang, 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 the old man wearing the paper hat suddenly grabbed Ji Kongjian's right leg. Like slamming a sandbag, he slammed him onto the ground, hitting him over a dozen times, causing Ji Kongjian to vomit blood, his head spinning, unable to distinguish directions. Finally, Ji Kongjian turned into a shooting star, thrown far out of ancient city by the old man. No one knew if he lived or died. In an instant, everyone turned to stone. This was too heaven-defying, too absurd. One palm repelled the Imperial Foundation back into the Imperial item, and he casually slammed Ji Kongjian like a sandbag. Where did this heaven-defying monster come from? This paper-hatted old man who suddenly appeared was the same old man who needed. The stone chest opened and wanted to take Qiye as a disciple. What a pity for the inkstone. Qiye regretted being unable to destroy the inkstone. He plucked the zither, collecting most of the Imperial Foundation. The remaining Imperial Foundation, with a clang, transformed into a single heavenly sword and slashed out. How about tasting my one sword? Qiye chuckled. The sparse Imperial Foundation transformed into a heavenly sword, cutting straight towards Van Saint's sword. Imperial Foundation turned into a sword. One strike shook the heavens. The Imperial might surged. heavily. Each stream of imperial might that fell was enough to break the backs of all living beings. When the imperial might swept across, it forced people to lie prostrate, unable to resist. One sword shaking the heavens, how many people lost color? The intense sunlight also dimmed, losing its brilliance. Under that single strike, the order of the six paths shattered, fundamentally. Unable to stop it, Van Saint's sword saw the imperial foundation turn into a sword, and his face instantly changed drastically. Even as a disciple of the sacred heaven sect patriarch, he could not block this one sword, unless his master personally struck. Open. As the sword strike descended, Van Saint's sword went all out, summoning his most precious treasure, his protective artifact. His two hands spread open, unfurling an imperial edict. Boom. A massive sound. Immortal light shot up to the sky. As the edict unfurled, heaven and earth lost color, and all living beings trembled. Within the edict was only one character, Spare. The character Spare formed naturally, one with heaven and earth. The moment this character appeared, the imperial might soared to the heavens, like a giant figure standing tall upon the edict. Imperial edict. Seeing the edict appear, many people present cried out in astonishment. An imperial edict was a decree personally written by an immortal emperor, representing the immortal emperor's will. Clang. The sword struck the imperial edict, like two planets colliding, scattering blazing imperial light to the heavens. Streams of imperial light rushed into the deepest part of the sky, illuminating the endless, dark vault. The streams of imperial light were like comets streaking across the sky. The light was dazzling, making the entire sky look like daytime. The two clashes of imperial might shook the entire ancient city. The powerful imperial might swept through. Under this imperial might, regardless of whether you were a true person or an ancient saint, you couldn't help but tremble with fear. The sword struck. The imperial foundation vanished, and the imperial edict's light dimmed significantly. The character Spare lost much of its brilliance. Although the imperial edict blocked the sword, it suffered heavy damage. Even so, Van Saint's sword was heartbroken. This was an imperial edict he had barely managed to acquire from the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom. It was a true treasure, a life-saving artifact. Just an ordinary imperial edict of immortal Emperor Azure Mystery. It's not a Heaven's Will edict, Qiye said, smiling with his zither. If you want to compete in imperial items with me, bring a Heaven's Will edict. As he finished speaking, he plucked the zither strings again. Clang, clang, clang. The zither sounds were like waves, each higher than the last. The imperial foundation instantly surged to the sky. Such a massive amount of imperial foundation rushing out instantly drained the ancient zither's divine essence. If this continued, all the imperial foundation in the ancient zither would be completely exhausted, leaving it as just an ordinary ancient zither. Clang. In an instant, the surging imperial foundation transformed into an invincible heavenly sword. This sword was like the Milky Way hanging high in the sky. One sword spanned the entire firmament, the heavenly sword encompassing the sun, moon, stars, and celestial rivers. When the sword formed, imperial Qi was unleashed, and the gods submitted. Without any doubt, the sword struck down, severing everything in the world. Whether god or demon, under this single strike, all were annihilated. Open. Van Saint's sword roared loudly. At this moment, he had no other choice. The character Spare within the imperial edict shot up to the sky. All its imperial foundation burst forth, transforming into the strongest imperial shield, trying to block this invincible sword strike. Boom. Under the strike, let alone the entire ancient city, even the surrounding cities trembled violently, like a small leaf boat in a terrifying storm, making everyone pale with shock. Too insane. If this sword struck ancient city, wouldn't it sink the city? Everyone was terrified. Following the loud sound, the sword split the character Spare. Although the imperial edict was heaven-defying, its imperial foundation was far inferior to the one belonging to immortal emperor Mingren, who often played the ancient zither. This ancient zither had accompanied him throughout his life. One sword split the character Spare, and the imperial edict instantly turned to dust. Van Saint's sword, holding the now dusty imperial edict, vomited fresh blood. His body was sent flying. The sound of breaking bones could be heard. With a boom, Van Saint's sword slammed fiercely into the ancient cliff, sending dust flying. Clang! Just at that moment, Qiye plucked the ancient zither. The heavenly sword transformed into two beams of sword light, cutting straight toward Sacred Heaven Tao Child. Open! Sacred Heaven Tao Child's face turned white with terror. He immediately unleashed his Great Sage artifact. With a massive boom, the Great Sage artifact shot up to the sky. As if a great sage had personally arrived, their sage might surging. Puffed. A soft sound. Even the Great Sage artifact failed. Sacred Heaven Tao Child was still not strong enough and couldn't unleash the Great Sage artifact's full power. Under the overwhelming, invincible heavenly sword, the two beams of sword light struck, and the Great Sage artifact was instantly cleaved in two. Bang! The two beams of sword light shot out, instantly piercing through Sacred Heaven Tao Child's knees. He heavily collapsed to his knees on the ground. Everything happened in a flash. One sword easily repelled Van Saint's sword. The sword light easily shattered the Great Sage artifact and pierced Sacred Heaven Tao Child's knees. I suddenly changed my mind, Qiye said slowly, holding the zither. I have plenty of opportunities to slaughter your Sacred Heaven sect. But today, I will spare your lives. However, you must kneel and apologize. At this moment, everyone fell completely silent. No one dared to breathe. Who would dare to laugh at Qiye now? The heaven-defying imperial item in his hand, its power shocked everyone. This imperial item contained such immense imperial foundation and immortal might, making everyone realize that this was a treasure that had accompanied an immortal emperor throughout his life. Although this item was inferior to a true imperial weapon, it was already terrifying enough to make all living beings tremble. Such an imperial item was capable of far more than just 2 or 3 strikes. For any cultivator, 2 or 3 strikes from an immortal emperor's power would be fatal. Dream on. Sacred Heaven Tao Child struggled to stand. His 2 knees were pierced by the imperial light. This was absolutely fatal. If he weren't a vassal king capable of regenerating his body, he might be crippled for life. Even so, his injuries were still extremely severe. Is that so? Qiye chuckled, taking one step forward and heavily stomping down. Sacred Heaven Tao Child's face changed. He slightly shifted his hands, attempting a technique to block Qiye's foot, but no matter how many Tao laws he utilized, he still couldn't block that foot, which was like 10,000 mountains. Bang! Sacred Heaven Tao Child's hands, holding up against the stomping foot, were pressed down, forcing him heavily onto his knees. The stone cliff shattered, and fresh blood stained the rock. Sacred Heaven Tao Child paled, his whole body trembling. Sweat the size of soybeans dripped down. Qiye's foot felt like 10,000 divine mountains. He used all his might just to hold up that foot. Van Saint's sword, who had barely managed to stand after being sent flying, saw this scene. His face changed drastically, and he shouted, "If you still wish to die, I can grant your wish," Qiye said leisurely. "Today, even if you bring an imperial item, you won't be able to save your lives. Be smart. And stand there obediently." Van Saint's sword's face was pale one moment and green the next. Today was an immense humiliation for him. As a disciple of the Sacred Heaven Sect Patriarch, his cultivation had advanced rapidly even during the age of the Void Tao. His strength and status were enough for him to look down on all beings who dared to disobey him. Yet, today, in front of the world, he was defeated by a junior, and he couldn't even save his own disciple. Sacred Heaven Tao Child sweated profusely, his entire body trembling. He was already heavily injured. And being suppressed by Qiye like this, blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. "I won't bother forcing you to clarify the matter of Demon Back Ridge where you deliberately left Jin Baojiao to die. Now, she follows me, serving me. My principle is very simple: whoever harms the people around me, I kill them. Today, you must apologize to her in front of everyone. You know the truth of this matter in your heart. She was unwilling to marry you and left the precious Pillar Saint sect. Why would there be talk of you discarding her? You must restore her honor today. I will spare your life for now. Qiye, his foot still on sacred heaven Tao child, said slowly. Hearing Qiye's words, the crowd couldn't help but exchange glances. No one had expected such a thing. No one had imagined that Chen Baojiao, as the princess of the Jade Purity Nation, had actually left the precious Pillar Saint sect. Chen Baojiao's heart swelled, her nose stingy and unnoticed. Her beautiful eyes were misty. She had never expected to regain her honor, but Qiye was helping her reclaim it. Dream on. If you have the guts, kill me, you pair of disgusting lovers. Sacred Heaven Tao child roared. Is that so? Qiye smiled, and heavily stomped down. With a crunching sound of breaking bones, Sacred Heaven Tao child was suppressed, vomiting a mouthful of blood. Qiye looked at him and said leisurely. I rarely torture my enemies to death. Normally, I give them a quick death, one strike to cleave them. However, today if you wish to seek death, it's not difficult. But I won't kill you. I will destroy your Tao foundation, shatter your lifespan wheel, and crush your fate palace, leaving you a cripple forever. I believe your Sacred Heaven sect won't keep a cripple like you. You. Hearing this, Sacred Heaven Tao child turned pale with horror. Destroying the Tao foundation, for a genius like him, he could start over. But shattering the lifespan wheel and crushing the fate palace? Even if he survived, he would forever be unable to cultivate, becoming a cripple eternally. For a high and mighty genius like Sacred Heaven Tao child, if he truly became a cripple one day, that would be 100 times worse than death. My patience is limited. Qiye said with a cold laugh. A large hand reached straight down, grasping toward Sacred Heaven Tao child's head. With a boom, streams of laws shot out from Sacred Heaven Tao child's head, his blood energy surged, and his fate palace surged with immense world essence. Resisting Qiye's large hand. Bang. Under the prison-suppressing god physique, Qiye's hand was heavier than 10,000 divine mountains. It was fundamentally irresistible. Under the suppression, streams of laws shattered, and the blood energy and world essence were crushed. The large hand pressed down towards the fate palace. Honor, if the green hills remain, there will be wood to burn. Seeing this scene, Van Saint Sword's face changed drastically. He immediately shouted. Even an immortal emperor had times of failure, choosing to abandon face to save his life, let alone you. If you don't survive today, how can you have it tomorrow? For Van Saint Sword, a genius like Sacred Heaven Tao child was rare. Nurturing such a genius was not easy for the Sacred Heaven sect, and he didn't want to see the Sacred Heaven sect's talent turn into a cripple. Sacred Heaven Tao child clenched his teeth, his muscles bulging as he tried to resist Qiye's suppression, but no matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't withstand Qiye's force. Even when you weren't injured, you couldn't withstand my suppression, let alone now. Unless you have a saint physique or are an ancient saint, you might have a chance. Now, you either apologize, or let me destroy your fate palace. Qiye said with a leisurely smile. Bang. At this moment, Qiye's large hand was already placed over Sacred Heaven Tao child's fate palace. Under Qiye's suppression, the fate palace was creaking, ready to explode at any moment. Sacred Heaven Tao child vomited a mouthful of blood. At this moment, his eyes looked like they would bleed. He was in a battle between heaven and men within his mind. Fine, I lose. Finally, Sacred Heaven Tao child chose submission and roared. He tightly gritted his teeth, finally saying, That's right, it was the precious Pillar Saint sect that proposed to break the engagement. It was the Chen family that disagreed with the marriage. As Sacred Heaven Tao child finished speaking, his entire body trembled. For a genius like him, submission was the ultimate humiliation in life. Today, being suppressed by Qiye and forced to kneel and admit fault in front of so many people, this would be a lifelong shadow for him. He swore to never rest until this vengeance was repaid. It wasn't so hard to bow your head. Was it? Qiye released Sacred Heaven Tao Child and said leisurely. Although you glossed over the truth, I will spare your life for now. The words spoken by Sacred Heaven Tao Child caused everyone present to fall silent. At this moment, no words were needed, everyone could guess some of the truth. Chen Baojiao was unwilling to marry Sacred Heaven Tao Child, even willing to abandon the Precious Pillar Saint sect. Although the full details were unspoken, many people could figure out a thing or two. Sacred Heaven Tao Child was now slumped there, lost in thought for a long time. At this moment, he could hear no sound. The humiliation of this day, he finally realized, he could never forget. The bitter humiliation was branded onto his heart. He was a son of heaven's pride. His Tao cultivation had advanced with explosive speed, a triumphant journey all the way. As the inheritor of the Sacred Heaven sect, he was high above, receiving the admiration of all as a heavenly prodigy wherever he went, shining brightly. Yet, today, he was suppressed by a junior much younger than himself, forced to kneel and apologize in front of everyone. This level of humiliation was something he could never forget in his entire life. At this moment, Chen Baojiao was so emotional she couldn't control herself. Since she had abandoned everything to leave the Precious Pillar Saint sect, she had been left with nothing. She was prepared to die rather than marry Sacred Heaven Tao Child. She had prepared herself to be criticized and cursed by everyone. She had never thought that one day she could reclaim her honor, and yet, today, it was Qiye who helped her reclaim it. Unbeknownst to her, her beautiful eyes were already moist. Qiye looked coldly at the surrounding crowd, at the many sect inheritors who had once fawned over Sacred Heaven Tao Child. He smiled and said, "It is your business who you choose to befriend. However, when you see someone gaining prominence and try to climb the social ladder, you had better control your mouths. If I hear any more slanderous rumors next time, I will very willingly cut out your tongues myself." At this, the young talents who had just been calling Sacred Heaven Tao Child brother trembled, cold sweat pouring down their backs. Forget them, even the cultivators present, be they vassal kings, true persons, or even ancient saints, chose silence. Without a doubt, this young man before them was a fierce individual. Commanding an imperial item meant he could simply act recklessly. Unless they possessed an imperial item or an immortal emperor weapon, they absolutely did not want to provoke this killing star. At this moment, the entire scene was silent. No one dared to say another word. No one wanted to provoke the killing star standing before them. "All right, I keep my word. You may leave now," Qiye finally waved his hand and said to Sacred Heaven Tao Child. At this point, even Van Saint Sword dared not act rashly. Qiye's possession of an imperial item made him extremely wary. That thing could absolutely kill him. Finally, Van Saint Sword helped Sacred Heaven Tao Child up and they left. When they were not far, Sacred Heaven Tao Child turned back and said fiercely, "Surnamely, I will repay this humiliation one day, twofold." His words were filled with resentment and venom, like the curse of a poisonous snake. Challenging Qiye at this moment made many people wipe sweat for Sacred Heaven Tao Child. If Qiye were to become enraged, he would truly kill him. "Welcome the challenge," Qiye smiled and said. "I never expected you to become my friend. I'm not afraid of having many friends, but even less afraid of having many enemies. Adding one more enemy in you changes nothing." Finally, Van Saint Sword helped Sacred Heaven Tao Child leave. Many cultivators who came to watch the show also dispersed. Those who had once claimed brotherhood with Sacred Heaven Tao Child quickly fled the area, lest they incur deadly retribution. Chen Baojiao looked at Qiye, her beautiful eyes gentle, filled with tears. With 1,000 words to say, she didn't know where to start. In the end, she said nothing, only letting out a soft sigh and clenching her fists tightly. 1,000 words were not as good as perfecting herself, so that in the future, she could serve her young master faithfully. After the crowd dispersed, the paper-hatted old man suddenly appeared from nowhere. Standing before Qiye, he chuckled and said, "Heh, little fellow, have you thought it over? Become my master. Become your master? Qiye glanced at him. The old man chuckled and said, Little fellow, although you possess an imperial item and can run rampant for a time, this is ultimately not a long-term plan. If you encounter an imperial weapon, you will certainly suffer a loss. An existence like the Sacred Heaven sect would struggle to produce an imperial weapon, but there are countless entities in this world much stronger than the Sacred Heaven sect. Some ancient nations can easily produce an imperial weapon. Once you encounter an imperial weapon, it could mean your death. Saying this, the old man became serious. He chuckled and said, Become my master. As long as you take me as your master, you will be the next immortal emperor. What about an imperial weapon? Qiye said with a smile, then glanced at him and slowly said, Become your master? That is impossible. I have no interest in hiding in the Heaven's Cave. How do you know? Upon hearing Qiye mention the Heaven's Cave, the old man instantly jumped up as if bitten by a poisonous snake, his face changing drastically. Li Xuangan and the others were also moved. This old man was extremely mysterious and unfathomable. The fact that he could repel Imperial Foundation with one palm showed how terrifying he was, yet Qiye mentioning the Heaven's Cave immediately caused his face to change dramatically. How could this not move Li Xuangan and the others? I calculated it with my fingers, that's all. Qiye looked at him and said indifferently. You should carefully consider the small golden coffin. One day, you will return it to me. Return it to you. The old man looked at Qiye as if seeing a monster and said, What are you talking about? That is my family heirloom treasure. When did my family heirloom treasure become your property? Your family heirloom treasure? Qiye looked at him with a noncommittal smile, saying, Are you truly certain it is your family heirloom treasure? And not something you secretly dug up from the Heaven's Cave? You. The old man leaped high into the air. If he had a tail, one would surely see it wagging furiously behind him. This is impossible. The old man looked at Qiye as if he had seen the most terrifying monster. He retreated several steps and said, No one knows this matter. You, how could you possibly know? If you don't want others to know, the only way is not to do it, Qiye said with a chuckle. Do you want me to talk a little about your true body? The old man looked as if he had seen a ghost. He turned and fled, quickly disappearing far into the distance. After running far away, the old man still didn't give up. He shouted from a distance. Brat, I don't believe you could know these things. I must investigate thoroughly. After saying that, he vanished without a trace. Qiye smiled and shook his head, sighing softly in his heart. After all these years, this fellow had finally become invincible. What place is the Heaven's Cave? After the old man fled, even Li Xuangan was curious and couldn't help but ask. The old man's face had changed drastically upon hearing it, as if he had seen a ghost. This place was absolutely full of secrets. Qiye glanced at her and said calmly. Just a small, unremarkable place. The Heaven's Cave, he naturally couldn't say that it was once his territory. This was a matter known by few. Seeing Qiye's reply, Li Xuangan didn't press further. She knew even if she asked, Qiye wouldn't tell. After this incident, Qiye's group no longer wished to stroll the ancient cliff and headed back to their residence. At the ancient cliff, many cultivators couldn't help but talk about Qiye and the cleansing incense ancient sect. In fact, before this, few cultivators knew who Qiye was. Especially cultivators from other regions had no idea of his identity. After the upheaval at the ancient cliff, many people understood that this young man, despite his age, was an absolute killing star with immense courage. The cleansing incense ancient sect, a centipede dies but never falls. Although they were nearly annihilated, they still possess a foundation that commands reverence. After all, they are an imperial lineage and immortal gate. Someone talking about the day's events couldn't help but sigh. 30,000 years ago, the cleansing incense ancient sect was defeated by the Sacred Heaven sect and declined ever since. In the eyes of many, the cleansing incense ancient sect was a third-rate minor sect, unworthy of attention. But today, Li Qiye's actions made many realize that as an imperial lineage and immortal gate, the cleansing incense ancient sect might still possess other immortal emperor artifacts. Otherwise, how could an ordinary disciple like Li Qiye possess an imperial item? He is merely relying on the might of an imperial item. This is ultimately relying on external objects. A cultivator must ultimately rely on themselves. An imperial item can only assert dominance for a time. Even if they possess 1 or 2 imperial items, it won't be enough for the cleansing incense ancient sect to rise again. Someone said coldly. Many people agreed with this statement. Especially some young cultivators echoed the sentiment. Exactly. What's so great about an imperial item? The imperial foundation and immortal might will eventually be exhausted. When that time comes, let's see what he uses to act so arrogantly. Without the imperial item, he is just a paper tiger who has lost his fangs, unworthy of the Tao. A junior like him, who doesn't know the limits of his own life, dares to run rampant everywhere, opposing others. One day, when he loses the imperial item, his death will come. I believe that even Fairy Li and the others won't be able to save him then. A young cultivator said coldly. Ultimately, it still boiled down to the matter of women. In the Middle Great Territory, countless young cultivators and geniuses admired Li Xuangan and Chen Baojiao. Li Xuangan was a peerless beauty with unparalleled talent. Chen Baojiao was a captivating temptress capable of toppling nations, whose smile enchanted all beings. In the Middle Great Territory, countless peers admired them, their souls utterly captivated. But today, these 2 most beautiful women in the Middle Great Territory chose to follow Li Qiye. This naturally caused many young cultivators to be jealous, even hating him to the core. That junior named Li is just a keptman relying on women. What's so great about that? For cultivators, strengthening one's own Tao foundation is the true path. As long as one strives diligently and presses forward, one will surely have the chance to achieve immortal emperor status. Relying on women to eat will only lead one to sink into the river of time, eventually becoming an ordinary person. A young peer said coldly. Naturally, when he spoke these words, he couldn't help but feel bitter. For a time, both at the ancient cliff and in ancient city, many people were talking about Li Qiye, and even more were talking about Li Xuangan and Chen Baojiao. Of course, opinions varied. Many young cultivators spoke of Li Qiye with bitterness. What they couldn't figure out was why daughters of heaven like Li Xuangan and Chen Baojiao, these devastatingly beautiful women, would choose an unknown junior like Li Qiye. Furthermore, the cleansing incense ancient sect was merely a third-rate sect. Many young cultivators believed that their own conditions were 100 times better than Li Qiye's, yet they couldn't understand why Li Xuangan and Chen Baojiao chose to follow Li Qiye. Li Qiye led Li Xuangan and Chen Baojiao away from the ancient cliff and returned directly to the 9 Saint Demon Gates compound. As Li Qiye's group entered their small courtyard, they saw Ling Qingfeng and the 9 Saint Demon Gate Grand Elder, Lei Shi, standing coldly to one side. Of course, they had already returned from the ancient cliff much earlier and did not know about the events that had just transpired there. What is it? Is something the matter? Li Qiye glanced at the blocking Ling Qingfeng and said with a chuckle. Li Xuangan also frowned slightly. Ling Qingfeng and Lei Shi repeatedly seeking trouble with Li Qiye was truly too much. As a disciple of the 9 Saint Demon Gate, she knew that immense interests were involved, but Elder Lei Shi's repeated actions clearly went against the sect master's will and deviated from the sect's grand plan. At this moment, Li Xuangan realized that Lei Shi dared to act like this because he had found a backer, and a powerful one at that, which caused her to let out a cold snort. Sir, namely, I don't know what trickery you used to gain His Majesty's trust, but as a disciple of the 9 Saint Demon Gate, I will absolutely not allow the 9 Saint Demon Gate to be deceived. Furthermore, I will not allow anyone to do anything that harms the interests of my 9 Saint Demon Gate. Ling Qingfeng stared coldly at Li Qiye and said. Li Xuangan was about to stand up but was restrained by Li Qiye. He looked at Ling Qingfeng with a beaming smile and said leisurely. Is this your intention, or is it the intention of your ancestral master, Elder Lei. Whose intention it is doesn't matter. Leng Qingfeng said coldly, any disciple of the Nine Saint Demon Gate will absolutely not allow anyone to harm the interests of the Nine Saint Demon Gate. Li Qiye said with a relaxed smile. In that case, you are a meritorious official of the Nine Saint Demon Gate. Then I wonder what intentions you, this disciple, protecting the Nine Saint Demon Gate, have. Leng Qingfeng had sought trouble with him time and again. This time, Li Qiye intended to thoroughly teach him and Lei Shi a lesson. Even out of respect for the Sunwheel Demon Emperor, he would not allow anyone to provoke him repeatedly. Leng Qingfeng looked coldly at Li Qiye, saying sternly, my Nine Saint Demon Gate does not raise idlers. And even less does it raise useless cripples. If you want to worm your way into our Nine Saint Demon Gate, that's not difficult. Take my 3 strikes. If you can withstand my 3 strikes, everything is negotiable. If you cannot withstand my 3 strikes, whether you live or die depends on your fate. As Leng Qingfeng finished speaking, Li Qiye couldn't help but smile, narrowing his eyes. Leng Qingfeng's words clearly meant he intended to kill him. Li Xuangan let out a cold grunt. Li Qiye was the key for the Nine Saint Demon Gate to win over the War God Temple. Now, Leng Qingfeng stepped out to provoke Li Qiye, even trying to kill him. This was no longer a private grudge. Behind this, someone was surely manipulating things. Leng Qingfeng and Lei Shi must have secured a powerful backer. Who the manipulator was, the answer was too obvious. In that case, you are full of confidence. Li Qiye narrowed his eyes slightly, looking at Leng Qingfeng with a chuckle. Try it, and you'll know. Leng Qingfeng said with a cold laugh, I won't make it difficult for you. We'll exchange 3 palm strikes. If you pass, that counts as your ability. To speak further, he seemed unbelievably benevolent. Finishing his words, Leng Qingfeng took a step forward. With a buzzing sound, like the ringing of a sword or the leaping of the Grand Tao, a blazing sun slowly rose behind Leng Qingfeng. The sunlight shone upon him, making his entire body golden. He looked as if he were forged from gold, radiating light, like the sun of the solar deity. Boom. As the sun hung high above his head, Leng Qingfeng's aura instantly erupted like a storm. His blood energy surged in waves. In a flash, Leng Qingfeng's entire aura underwent a change, transitioning from quantitative to qualitative, instantly breaking through the vassal king bottleneck. His true person aura surged forward like a fierce tide. Impossible. Upon seeing this aura transition from vassal king to true person, even Li Xuangan was shocked. If the younger generation truly attained the true person realm, that would be too frightening. However, being a genius herself, she immediately noticed the trick. Her expression changed, and she said, that is not the technique of our sect. Junior sister, you are correct. At this moment, Leng Qingfeng, bearing the blazing sun on his back, did not conceal his surging true person aura in the slightest. He said proudly, my personal relationship with the Azure Mystery Heavenly Sun is excellent. He imparted to me the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom's supreme ancient technique. With this technique, fighting ancient saints and slaying true persons is a guarantee. Xuangan, do not interfere in this matter. Otherwise, if Fenger injures you, it may ruin your Tao foundation. The supreme ancient technique of the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom is invincible for all ages. Even Lei Shi, standing to the side, warned coldly. Li Xuanyan's eyes were cold, and her face grew even colder. There was a hidden meaning in these words. This was more than just a warning. Seeing Leng Qingfeng with the sun on his back, Li Qiye's eyes narrowed. Then, his face changed dramatically, and he said in horror, the 9 suns locking heaven art. The legendary invincible technique of the ancient past. As the words fell, he immediately retreated 3 steps with hasty steps. Li Qiye's expression was too genuine, making it clear that he was genuinely terrified by this peerless technique. You truly know your goods. You even recognize the supreme ancient technique of the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom. Dying today by the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom's supreme ancient technique can be considered dying in peace. Leng Qingfeng looked at Li Qiye coldly. Impossible. Qiye shouted loudly, then said angrily. How can this be the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom's supreme technique? This is the invincible technique of the Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect. The 9 suns locking heaven art. The blazing sun hangs high, swallowing the 9 suns' true fire, guiding the solar essence to the governing channel, transforming it into true fire, and activating the true fate. It can unleash power more than 10 times its normal strength, slaying enemies across 3 realms of cultivation. Qiye yelled out angrily and choked up. However, as he reached this point, he immediately covered his mouth, looking as if he had said too much, glancing around nervously, seemingly afraid of being overheard. Qiye's lapse in composure stunned Chen Baojiao for a moment. She wanted to reach out and pull him, but Li Xuangan stopped her, gently shaking her head. Qiye's revelations, coupled with his moment of lost composure, instantly shocked Leng Qingfeng and Lei Shi. Lei Shi couldn't help but take a step forward, staring intently at Qiye, and said coldly, Is this truly the supreme ancient technique of the Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect? It was before, but my Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect has lost this technique. Qiye quickly looked left and right, laughing as he said, Let's talk about the 3-strike agreement. However, at this moment, Leng Qingfeng and Lei Shi were clearly captivated by this matter. Especially Leng Qingfeng, whose eyes narrowed. He slowly said, Swallowing the solar essence of the firmament, guiding it to the governing channel, transforming it into true fire, and stimulating the true fate. I was just talking nonsense. There is no such thing, no such thing. Don't take it seriously. The so-called 9 suns locking heaven art's ability to kill people across realms by absorbing solar essence is just a rumor, absolutely not real. Our Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect never believed such rumors. Don't believe it. It couldn't possibly be true. Where in the world is there a technique that allows one to slay enemies across realms? Qiye hastily denied it, waving his hands as he spoke, looking as if he were trying to cover up the truth. But Qiye's panicked, secretive demeanor only further stirred suspicion in Leng Qingfeng and Lei Shi. The Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom had indeed imparted the 9 wheels locking heaven art to Leng Qingfeng. This technique was indeed incredibly domineering. However, Leng Qingfeng always felt something was amiss, though he couldn't pinpoint what it was. Furthermore, Leng Qingfeng and his ancestral master Lei Shi had always suspected that the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom's act of imparting this supreme technique to Leng Qingfeng seemed overly generous. Leng Qingfeng suspected that the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom had not imparted the complete 9 wheels locking heaven art to him. Now, Qiye's sudden, erroneous revelation instantly heightened the suspicions of Leng Qingfeng and Lei Shi. This supreme technique was likely seized by the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom from the Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect, and furthermore, the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom had truly not imparted the complete technique. At this moment, Leng Qingfeng stared intently at Qiye, his gaze intense, observing Qiye's every move to determine if his words were reliable. Seeing Leng Qingfeng staring at him, Qiye hastily shook his head and waved his hands, saying, It's just a joke, absolutely not true. Although our Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect has lost the 9 suns locking heaven art, we never believed that kind of rumor to be real. Qiye's flustered appearance only made Leng Qingfeng believe that statement more. He sneered and said, Whether it's true or not, trying it out is the only way to know. With a crisp buzz, Leng Qingfeng immediately activated the 9 suns locking heaven art. In an instant, the sun behind him became even hotter, like a genuine sun. Absorb. As Leng Qingfeng shouted, the sun behind him transformed into a massive true fire vortex, attempting to draw in the true sun fire from the sky. Buzz, buzz, buzz. A series of soft tremors rang out. To the surprise of both Leng Qingfeng and Lei Shi, it succeeded. The sunlight in the sky gathered into beams. Strands of sun rays, fine as silk, flew into the true fire vortex, making Leng Qingfeng's flames even hotter. It truly is so. Feeling the surge of powerful true fire, Leng Qingfeng was ecstatic. Without holding back, he unleashed all his blood energy, activating the 9 suns locking heaven art, frantically devouring the true sun fire from the sky. Buzz, buzz, buzz. As Leng Qingfeng devoured furiously, like a whale swallowing the ocean, the true sun fire falling from the heavens became increasingly intense. Leng Qingfeng guided the true sun fire to his governing channel, transforming it into the fire of life. In an instant, his body became a raging true fire furnace. His life furnace instantly blazed with sky-high flames. In that instant, Leng Qingfeng felt his life furnace could incinerate all of heaven and earth. He felt his fire of life surging ceaselessly. In a flash, he felt his life force become even stronger. In that instant, he became even more convinced of Li Qiye's earlier statement. He frantically devoured the true sun fire descending from the heavens. Boom, boom, boom. In an instant, the true sun fire in the sky roared continuously. The true sun fire descended in powerful currents, as if the entire ocean of fire was pouring down. Moreover, it grew larger and larger, with rumbling sounds. The true sun fire was like a flood, rushing straight down from the sky, immensely fierce. What happened? Qi Yun and Elder Yun, who had just returned not long ago, felt the true sun fire pouring down. Their faces changed drastically, and they immediately rushed towards the source of the commotion. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At this point, Leng Qingfeng no longer needed to consciously devour the true sun fire. The true sun fire was rushing straight towards him by itself. At this moment, his body had become a solar furnace, like the sea receiving 100 rivers, attempting to swallow the entire sun in the sky. Qi Yun and Elder Yun rushed over and saw this scene. Their expressions changed drastically. They both sensed the powerful, surging energy. Seeing the true sun fire now pouring down spontaneously, Li Qiye knew that this was no longer something Leng Qingfeng could control. He looked utterly horrified, shaking his head and waving his hand at Leng Qingfeng. Stop. Absolutely stop drawing in the true sun fire. Didn't the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom tell you that this was just a rumor? This is absolutely impossible. Absolutely impossible. Leng Qingfeng laughed maniacally and said, "Let me show you what the truly supreme technique is. Pity that although this 9 suns locking heaven art originated from your cleansing incense ancient sect, your sect has lost this supreme unique skill. Today, let me show you its might." As soon as he finished speaking, boundless true sun fire surged from Leng Qingfeng's entire body. His whole being seemed encased in the sun. He looked like the solar deity sun emerging from the sun. A single wisp of his true sun fire could incinerate the earth. At this moment, the inconceivable happened. Leng Qingfeng's body actually began to emanate the aura of an ancient saint. He looked like a solar ancient saint descending upon the world, causing Qi Yun and Elder Yun to change color. Leng Qingfeng was a disciple of the 9 Saint Demon Gate, his cultivation was clear to them. He absolutely could not be in the ancient saint realm. Boom, boom, boom. In an instant, the true sun fire in the sky was like a burst dam, completely unstoppable. It was as if the entire vast ocean had been breached, and the true sun fire poured down like a relentless flood. This scene was witnessed by many people in ancient city. They saw the sun in the sky acting like a funnel, with the true sun fire cascading down like a flood, unstoppable. Seeing this sight, many people were deeply moved. Ah! But in just a moment, Leng Qingfeng screamed miserably. At this point, his entire body burst into flames. This was no longer him using the 9 suns locking heaven art to control the true sun fire. The fierce true sun fire was like a rushing beast. In an instant, it incinerated Leng Qingfeng's entire body. Leng Qingfeng screamed hoarsely in agony. No. Fenger. Lei Shi was horrified. He immediately struck out, pressing his hand down. Freezing energy sealed the world for 10,000 miles, turning into endless profound ice that locked onto Leng Qingfeng's body. But even Lei Shi's strike was useless. The profound ice he formed was merely a drop in the bucket. The profound ice instantly vaporized. With a puff, a flame, like a spirit snake, immediately wrapped around Lei Shi's wrist. Seeing this scene, Qi Yun and his disciple also changed color. Elder Yun wanted to strike, but Qi Yun restrained him, gently shaking his head. Ah! Leng Qingfeng let out an extremely tragic scream. In an instant, Leng Qingfeng's body fell to the ground, collapsing like a toppled golden mountain and shattered. Jade pillar. When his body hit the ground, his entire form disintegrated. It was no longer flesh and blood, it had been burned to ashes. Ah! At this moment, it was Lei Shi's turn to scream. Miserably. Leng Qingfeng was incinerated, and the true sun fire pouring down from the sky stopped. However, the true sun fire, like a parasite, immediately latched onto Lei Shi after its host died. In an instant, Lei Shi's entire body burst into flames. No! Lei Shi cried out, using endless cold energy to suppress the true sun fire on his body. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The sound of the fierce fire burning rang out. Even Lei Shi's immense cold energy was useless. In an instant, his entire body was completely burned up. He fell to the ground, his entire body reduced to ash. After Lei Shi was incinerated, the fierce flames on his body slowly vanished, like a fire that had consumed its paper. Why? Lei Shi, an 8-star ancient saint, was reduced to ash. He was dead. As he swallowed his last breath, his burnt eyes were wide open, staring at Li Qiye. He died without understanding. At some unknown point, Li Qiye had already led Li Xuangan and the others to stand far away, observing from a distance. I said it was a rumor, yet you insisted on not believing it. The Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom acquired the 9 Suns Locking Heaven art from my Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect. Didn't they tell you when they imparted it that the 9 Suns Locking Heaven art was once a wicked art? Li Qiye said leisurely. Unfortunately, Leng Qingfeng and Lei Shi had been burned to death and could no longer hear Li Qiye's words. Li Qiye walked closer, looking at the ashes of Leng Qingfeng and Lei Shi on the ground, and slowly said, "What a pity. Refusing to listen to the old men, suffering a loss right before your eyes. The true sun fire was merely used to burn the human furnace to refine the true fire order." With that, he extended one finger. As the life furnace within Li Qiye's fate palace ignited a raging fire, a flame slowly rose from Li Qiye's fingertip. At this moment, the inconceivable happened. 2 crimson fire chains emerged from the ashes of Leng Qingfeng and Lei Shi. The fire chains were red-hot, like iron chains heated to a searing glow in a smelting furnace. Clang, clang, clang. A series of iron lock sounds rang out. The 2 fire chains were pulled out from the 2 piles of ash. At this moment, Li Qiye's fingertip was like a magnet. Driven by his life furnace, it actually drew in the 2 fire chains. The 2 fire chains merged into one, dissolving into a stream of true fire order. In that moment, the true fire order, like a spirit snake, instantly drilled into Li Qiye's finger and into his fate palace. Clang. As the true fire order entered Li Qiye's fate palace, it transformed into a large lock. The lock descended, seemingly locking heaven and earth, making Li Qiye's fate palace seem utterly unbreakable. Slowly, the lock rippled with runes. Each rune was tiny but shone brightly, as if every rune were melted and forged from genuine iron. As these runes moved, they finally awakened a forgotten fragment of memory in Li Qiye's sea of consciousness. A supreme structure of text appeared, the complete 9 Suns Locking Heaven art. The 9 Suns Locking Heaven art, you would never be able to truly comprehend its truth. Li Qiye looked at the ashes of Leng Qingfeng and Lei Shi and said with a chuckle, "That's right, the 9 Suns Locking Heaven art was once the supreme technique of the Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect. It could strike the azure firmament above and punish demon emperors below. However, even the Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect in the ancient past did not know that the 9 Suns Locking Heaven art was a deeply wicked art. In the ancient past, the charm spirit race once produced an incredibly clever genius. He created this wicked art, called the 9 Suns Locking Heaven art. In fact, before that, this technique was not called the 9 Suns Locking Heaven art, but the 9 Suns Extinguishing God art. Although the name sounded Pleasant, it did not extinguish gods, but rather cultivators who served as human furnaces. This genius imparted this technique to other powerful cultivators. After those powerful cultivators cultivated this technique, their strength would increase dramatically. However, they did not know that they were slowly becoming the human furnaces for this genius. When the time was ripe, and these human furnaces became powerful enough, it would be the time for the genius to reap his harvest. He would guide these human furnaces, step by step, to use the technique to absorb true sun fire, intentionally leading them to refine the true sun fire into their own fire of life. At that point, the boundless true sun fire would incinerate the human furnaces into ashes. However, after the true sun fire destroyed all their cultivation and incinerated the cultivator's life furnace, it would transform into the true fire order. After incinerating the human furnace, the genius could absorb the refined true fire order. The more true fire order he absorbed, the stronger his wicked technique became, perhaps even achieving invincibility. In that era, Qiye, as the Dark Crow, had someone slay this genius and seize the wicked art called the Nine Suns Extinguishing God Art. At the time, Qiye wanted to destroy this wicked art. However, after examining the technique, he couldn't help but admire the ingenuity of the genius who created such an profound and unparalleled technique. He felt it would be a pity to destroy this wicked art. Qiye expended countless efforts, even consulting with an immortal emperor, finally modifying this wicked art, turning it into a supreme technique. One could even call it an invincible technique. Later, Qiye named this technique the Nine Suns Locking Heaven Art. That year, when he mentored immortal Emperor Mingren, he taught him this art. This art once followed immortal Emperor Mingren, sweeping across the 9 heavens and 10 lands with unstoppable might. Unfortunately, the cleansing incense ancient sect, for some unknown reason, failed to preserve the complete transmission of this technique. 30,000 years ago, when the cleansing incense ancient sect faced disaster, they lost the supreme technique manual. How the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom acquired it is a secret the outside world would never know. In fact, after the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom obtained this supreme technique, they had been studying it continuously. Many powerful cultivators and geniuses of the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom speculated about the technique. However, they always felt something was missing, always feeling that the technique was incomplete and severely flawed. This time, the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom was willing to impart this supreme technique to Leng Qingfeng. In reality, it was merely a test. Leng Qingfeng, believing he was cultivating a supreme technique, heard Qiye's words and thought the method mentioned could truly enhance his fighting power. He did not know that while this method could increase strength, once utilized, he would become a human furnace. Qiye acted too realistically. Leng Qingfeng fell into Qiye's trap, believing he had found the missing part of the supreme technique. In the end, he met the fate of being incinerated, and even Lei Shi, who struck out to save him, was instantly burned to death. The constantly surging true sun fire was immensely domineering. Neither Leng Qingfeng nor Lei Shi had time to think much before they were reduced to ashes. This outcome, however, benefited Qiye, allowing him to acquire the true fire order, which transformed into a large lock. It also allowed Qiye to recover the erased memory fragment of the 9 Suns Locking Heaven art. Now, Qiye possessed the complete 9 Suns Locking Heaven art. At this moment, the entire compound was completely silent. Even Elder Yun couldn't help but shudder. Fortunately, his master had restrained him. Otherwise, his fate would have been the same as Elder Lei Shi's. Yet, Li Xuangan and Chen Baojiao, who had witnessed the entire event unfold, couldn't help but draw a sharp breath. From beginning to end, Qiye did not make a single move. But Leng Qingfeng, who challenged him, was dead, and even Lei Shi was dead. Furthermore, up until the last moment of their death, they still couldn't comprehend how they died. At this moment, Chen Baojiao finally understood why Li Xuangan had held her back. From start to finish, their young master had been acting. Leng Qingfeng had long fallen into their young master's calculations. Now, it seemed she was still not as perceptive as Li Xuangan when it came to understanding their young master. At this point, Qiye let out a sigh of relief. Then, he looked at Qi Yun and his disciple standing to the side, revealing his snow-white teeth, and said, "Elder Qi, practicing modified techniques imparted by other sects is a dangerous matter. One might accidentally play with fire and die. Elder Qi, wouldn't you agree?" At this, the two master and disciple, Qi Yun and Elder Yun, couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines. From beginning to end, Li Qiye hadn't moved a finger, yet Leng Qingfeng and Lei Shi were reduced to ashes. At this moment, they felt that this 15 or 16-year-old brat before them resembled a little devil grinding his snow-white fangs. Opposing him meant one might not even know when or how they died. Qi Yun let out a soft sigh. He understood why His Majesty valued Li Qiye. It was not simply because Li Qiye could command the guardian of their 9-saint demon gate. In the short span of one day, Li Qiye had heavily injured Van Saint's sword, suppressed Sacred Heaven Dao Child, and now incinerated Lei Shi. Yet, such events, in the hands of the 15 or 16-year-old youth before them, seemed effortless. True persons and ancient saints alike, anyone who opposed him met a tragic end. Li Qiye smiled. Then led Li Xuangan and Chen Baojiao inside. Qi Yun looked at the two piles of ashes on the ground and couldn't help but sigh softly. Our 9-saint demon gate has lost a grand elder and a talented disciple with a bright future. Elder Yun, as the grand elder, said regretfully, looking at the ashes on the ground. Qi Yun shook his head and said, "This may not entirely be a bad thing. Although the loss is heavy, it avoids internal strife. Our 9-saint demon gate's chosen camp is the War God Temple, not the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom." Elder Lei's lineage was getting too close to the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom. That would ultimately have been a disaster. Now that Elder Lei and Leng Qingfeng are dead, their lineage's vitality is severely damaged. Their desire to defect to the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom is now impossible to realize. Elder Yun fell silent, but he had to admit that his master's words made sense. The 9-saint demon gate's relationship with the War God Temple had been maintained for a very long time. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the 9-saint demon gate had several geniuses who entered the War God Temple. It was precisely because of this that they gained the War God Temple's strong support. However, Lei Shi's lineage still sought to rise. They chose the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom, hoping to use its support to eventually seize control of the 9-saint demon gate. This kind of internal conflict was something the 9-saint demon gate elders did not want to see. Infighting would severely damage the 9-saint demon gate and drain its vitality. Now, the 9-saint demon gate itself suffered no internal casualties, while Lei Shi and Leng Qingfeng died tragically. This undoubtedly cut off the intentions of those in Lei Shi's lineage who wished to defect to the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom. Back in the room, Li Qiye said to Li Xuangan, "Did the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom participate in the siege of the Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect back then?" Li Xuangan shook her head and said, "I don't know the specifics. However, I once heard my master say that they did not directly show their face. My master said that in the battle that year, although our 9-saint demon gate wished to lend a hand to the Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect, someone from Sky Trampling Mountain secretly orchestrated the overall situation, leaving our 9-saint demon gate willing but unable to help. Although Sky Trampling Mountain did not directly appear, the entire campaign was related to them. Later, my master speculated that more than one imperial lineage and immortal gate might have intervened in that war." Hearing this, Li Qiye nodded slightly. As the saying goes, a centipede dies but never falls. Even if the Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect was not what it once was, it was still an immortal emperor lineage that had stood for tens of thousands of years. Although the Sacred Heaven Sect rose suddenly that year, it might not have been able to destroy the Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect alone, as the Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect's foundation still remained. Of course, the Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect was a tempting piece of fat. Many lineages would willingly carve it up. To take down such a behemoth, other imperial lineages and immortal gates must have joined in. Otherwise, the Sacred Heaven Sect alone could not have swallowed the Cleansing Incense Ancient Sect. The Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom. Li Qiye couldn't help but narrow his eyes. The Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom acquiring the 9 Suns Locking Heaven art was no coincidence. Even if the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom did not directly act in that battle, they likely couldn't. Escape involvement. Li Xuanyan's heart stirred slightly. When others mentioned the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom, they paled in fear, but their young master was different. He seemed to hold the Azure Mystery Ancient Kingdom in no regard whatsoever. At this moment, Qiye chuckled, then mused for a moment. He took out a pen and wrote a list, handing it to Li Xuangan, saying, "Have someone purchase all these items. I need them as quickly as possible." Li Xuangan looked at the list and couldn't help but look at Qiye strangely. Besides a pile of spirit herbs, there were some very odd items, such as burial clothes and the like. Looking down the list, an outsider would think someone was preparing for a funeral. What is this for?" Li Xuangan looked at the bizarre list and asked curiously. Qiye chuckled, then narrowed his eyes, and said leisurely, "Entering the ancient corpse grounds, we must go to offer sacrifices." Sacrifices? Chen Baojia was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but ask, "Does young master have a senior buried in the ancient corpse grounds?" "You'll know when the time comes," Qiye said mysteriously. Seeing Qiye's reluctance to speak, Li Xuangan didn't ask further and immediately sent someone to purchase everything on the list. Qiye waited for Li Xuangan to return with the items he needed. Taking advantage of this free time, he quickly focused on his cultivation. For him, the construction of his Tao foundation was a gradual process, but his physique was different. He had to quickly solidify his physique. He had his own plans. For him, his ambition was not limited to just the prison-suppressing god physique, he needed other physiques as well. If others knew Li Qiye's thoughts, they would probably call him insane or foolish. The reason was simple: any cultivator only possesses one physique. For a cultivator, the physical body determines what kind of physique you possess. And the physical body, like the true fate, lifespan wheel, and fate palace, is unique. A person only has one true fate, one lifespan wheel, and one fate palace. It's impossible to have two true fates, which would imply 2 lives and 2 souls. This is impossible. The physical body is the same. A person cannot possess 2 physiques, at least in principle. Of course, principles did not apply to Qiye. As his lifespan wheel rotated, blood energy flowed, and laws encircled his physique. After an unknown amount of time, a clang, clang, clang sound suddenly rang out. Strands of Tao laws, like chains, instantly interwoven, transforming into armor that instantly covered his physique. Boom. In an instant, Qiye's body shook. In that moment, Qiye's body seemed to open a massive treasure trove. In this flash, Qiye's physique was crystal clear, visible down to every muscle, bone, and even every pore. Qiye could clearly feel his body's pulse, sensing every subtle intake of breath. At this time, the heart within his physique was dazzling, manifesting various phenomena. It was like a path leading to a world of treasures, yet also like the opening of a sacred gate. Around his physique, various phenomena appeared. It was as if there were hellish cycles of reincarnation. Roaring gods and demons, the 9 underworlds carrying the weight of eternity, and the peace of all living beings. No matter what the phenomenon, gods and demons, the 9 underworlds, or even hellish reincarnation, everything was suppressed beneath his physique. His physique seemed to dominate everything in this world. All living beings, all gods and demons, all life throughout the ages, could not escape the existence of this physique. All were suppressed by this terrifying, supreme physique, the prison-suppressing god physique. Qiye's mind shook. He finally opened his eyes. At this moment, his gaze flashed with joy. He murmured, "I finally achieved something." Saying this, he paused, focusing his gaze, and muttered, "The minor tribulation is about to arrive." Prison-suppressing god physique. One of the 12 supreme immortal physiques. Achieving a supreme immortal physique, how could this be easily done? It was harder than ascending to heaven. The profound mysteries of a supreme physique were not something everyone could comprehend. For any cultivator, delving into the secrets of the physique and cultivating an invincible immortal physique was an extremely arduous task. However, for Qiye, comprehending the mysteries of the physique was not difficult. On the path of the immortal physique, no one in the world had walked further than him. He had personally mentored those who achieved grand completion immortal physiques, and more than once. He had explored all 12 immortal physiques. Having lived for hundreds of thousands of years, no one had expended more effort on the physique than him. For Qiye, cultivating an immortal physique required diligence. The profound truth he had fully grasped. As long as he pressed forward bravely, he would one day achieve the immortal physique. Qiye had been tirelessly cultivating the prison-suppressing god physique. His diligent cultivation finally yielded a return. Now, the prison-suppressing god physique was finally on the verge of reaching minor completion. Once he passed the minor tribulation, it would be a minor completion immortal physique. Although still far from grand completion. However, once the immortal physique reached minor completion, it signified extraordinary achievement. Throughout the ages, even a minor completion immortal physique was a terrifying figure. The suppression exerted by the physique commanded the awe of any cultivator. Qiye took a deep breath. A minor completion immortal physique was an extremely exciting matter for any cultivator. Once the immortal physique reached minor completion, it posed a huge threat to a grand completion saint physique. Although Qiye was joyful, he was not overly excited. He took a deep, steady breath. He was not rushing to face the minor tribulation, he needed to perfectly sever the immortal physique's minor tribulation. Qiye remained serene. He opened his second Fate Palace. In the second Fate Palace, the small confused Dao Bone, Tu Ho Du Dao Kot, was immersed in world essence, under the influence of life force and life water. At this time, the Dao Bone was not only crystal clear and radiant, but it also emitted circles of divine light. Deep within these circles of divine light, a domain gate seemed to open. Faintly, various treasures were visible, and in the center of the domain gate, a figure stood tall. This figure seemed capable of shattering everything in the world, capable of breaking through eternity, carrying an aura that overlooked all living beings and swept across the 9 worlds. Sensing the faint pulse, Qiye couldn't help but sigh softly. This was good news for him, the small confused one still had hope. The 9 Saint Demon Gate did not disappoint Qiye. In a short time, the 9 Saint Demon Gate prepared all the items Qiye needed. Thank you for listening to the story on KTN Storyverse. Please like and subscribe to support the channel.